Welcome to our sixth lesson. Today, we'll be speaking about the role of love in Sufism. Nowadays, when people hear the word Sufism, they almost take it synonymous with divine love, crazy love, intoxicated love. There is this image of the Sufi as the lover in his quest of the beloved. And we have all this love poetry in translation. So mostly when people think about Sufism, they think about that kind of love. And there is truth to it, no doubt. But there is also a problem here. And the problem is that when you have this image of Sufism being this path of the lovers that leave behind everything, fall into this divine ecstasy, and don't care about the rules of religion, then the image somehow, um, that image somehow tends to ignore that actually Sufism is also a path of self-discipline, is a path of rigorous spiritual practice, in which, of course, um, the fundamentals of Islam, as we have seen until now, play a very big role. And this should never be forgotten, that the lovers who really attained to that kind of love, that kind of pure love, they are the ones who went through a long process of religious education, of self-discipline, of spiritual practice. So they always go hand in hand. And there is another problem with love, which is that the word love in our culture nowadays has so many connotations. It has been cheapened to a large extent. Love, what we mostly think of as love, is romantic love. So Sufi poems in translation, they are always or often they are made to look as if they are love poems to a woman or to an earthly physical beloved. So because we have cheapened love and we have narrowed down our concept of love in modern times, we cannot really understand the kind of love that the Sufis were talking about. So love in our times has been reduced to a very small part of its full potency. For example, in Sufi circles, what I've experienced in Syria, in the mosque in Aleppo, the stories that I told you, or also in Istanbul when we visit gatherings of Sufis, is that there is in those communities a lived kind of love in action, love shown through kindness, through caring for another, through beauty in human interaction. And one part of this culture is the culture of sohbet. And sohbet, that's the Turkish pronunciation of the word, sohbet is divine conversation with the quality of love, with loving kindness. So it's not only knowledge that is transported by the discourse of a spiritual master. With that knowledge comes a quality of love, of embodied love. So it's knowledge and love together. In the Eastern traditions, you call it satsang, sitting with the truth. Now let's go back to the Hadith Qudsi, that we started with in our last lesson. I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known. Therefore, I created the world. So in the last lesson, we focused on the aspect of being known, knowledge. And now we want to turn to love. I loved to be known. What does this mean? It means that love is at the center of existence, is the very reason for creation. This kind of love, which we call hub in Arabic, permeates the whole universe. By the way, hub is not only the only term for love. We have almost 11, or at least 11 words for love in Arabic. Another one is the word ishq. And ishq, or as you pronounce it in Persian, ashq, ashq, or in Turkish, ashk. This word actually comes from the root ashaka, and it describes a plant, a vine that twists itself around a tree and presses so hard upon the trunk of that tree that the tree eventually dies. So this very poetic image, if we now confer this on the word love, we see the truth that intense love always involves death. And we'll go and look at this more in detail. Now, one question that Sufis have always asked themselves is, how can we put love into words? Is that even possible? How can we even speak about this heavenly quality that we call love in our common language? Rumi says, when it comes to describing the nature of love, the pen breaks apart and ceases to write. Let's look at this famous poem from the first pages of the Masnavi, just very close to the story of the reed flute that we already read together. And here Rumi is struggling with defining love. He says, whatever I say in exposition and explanation of love, when I come to love, I am ashamed of that. Although the commentary of the tongue makes clear, yet silent love is clearer. While the pen was making haste in writing, it split upon itself as soon as it came to love. In expounding love, the intellect lay down like a donkey in the mire. It was love that uttered the explanation of love and being in love. The proof of the sun is the sun. If you require the proof, do not avert your face from him. Ibn Arabi, we already said that Ibn Arabi is the representative of the school of knowledge, whereas Rumi can be said to be the poet of love. Ibn Arabi also has an explanation here. He says, love has no definition through which its essence can be known. Rather, it is given descriptive and verbal definitions, nothing more. Those who define love have not known it. Those who define love have not known it. Those who have not tasted it by drinking it down have not known it. And those who say that they have been quenched by it have not known it. For love is drinking without quenching. Love is drinking without quenching. And Rumi uses a similar image in another poem when he says, what is it to be a lover? To have perfect thirst. So let me explain the water of life. So we see that there is a fundamental problem when we speak about love, that whatever we say, that is not it. It's the same thing with speaking about God, right? We've already made this point many times. But still, by speaking of it and by reading the great love poetry of the Sufis, we can awaken a certain awareness of love in our souls. We can maybe acquire a taste of that love. And this can lead us to a remembrance, lead us to remember what that love is. Because, as Sufis say, we all are made of love and we all carry that love in us. We just need to awaken it. Now, as we said in the Hadith Qudsi, love is the universal force, is the force behind all of creation. It's the motive force for God's creative activity. God is love. That's why one of the 99 names of God in Islam is Al-Wadud, the loving one. It is not just a divine name or quality. In fact, as many Sufis have asserted, love is equal to the being of God. So it's not an emotion, as we usually think. It is really a divine essence. It is a being. It is about being and becoming. And even also it can be manifested through doing. All things are infused with love. There is no place where love cannot be found. You can say that the branches of the tree, they grow towards the light because of love. The animals take care of their young babies because of love. And the heavens move because of love. So love is what motivates all creatures to action. The fact that humans love God necessitates that God, before that, loves the human being. So from the Islamic perspective, it is first God who loves humans, and then the human being can love God. As the Quran says in the fifth surah, He loves them and they love Him. So here we have a dualistic perspective, which on that level, of course, has its own validity. But then when we pass through the level of non-duality, and we also have parts in the Quran that speak from that level, then we see that the very force in the human being that loves and that creates love is, of course, nothing but God Himself or herself. You already know the Basmala, the formula Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of the all-merciful Ar-Rahman and the all-compassionate Ar-Rahim. This sentence, which is used not only at the beginning of all the surahs and all the prayers, but also in daily life by Muslims to sanctify their acts and their work, to begin something. This sentence is a way of bringing that divine love into life, because it is the divine rahmah, the mercy, the loving kindness of God that is the energy, the force behind everything. Sufis also call that the nafas al-Rahman, the breath of the merciful. Sayyid Hossein Nasr, in his book, The Garden of Truth, which I'm drawing upon, talks about 4 stages of love. First of all, the love of God for Himself, and we have that in the Hadith Qudsi. Then the love of God for his creation, including the human beings, then our love for the divine, and then in the fourth stage, our love for other beings, for other humans, when we love other humans. And that love also eventually going back to the love of God. Now let's talk about that fourth stage, the human love. As humans, we can experience many forms of love. We love our parents, we love our children, we love our partner, our spouse, we love our town, maybe our country, our culture. We love nature. Many are in love with art, or they are in love with their religions. And all these forms of love, if it is real love, they involve going beyond one's own ego, because you surpass yourself by feeling that love. So this love for objects is what Sufis have called ishq majozi, or metaphorical love. And the love, the pure love of God, is what they call ishq haqiqi, or real love. So in the Sufi perspective, in the Sufi perspective, metaphorical love, ishq majozi, is only a reflection of that real love, that real divine love, ishq haqiqi. Because in fact, all our kinds of love that we feel on this earthly plane is in fact only a reflection of that divine love. And behind all forms of love is in fact a deep yearning of our soul for that pure divine love that we are all made of and that we all want to return to. But that doesn't mean that Sufism and Islam do not recognize the importance of human love. In fact, romantic love, as Nasser also explains, is a testing ground for the growth of the soul emotionally and spiritually. As they say, sometimes marriage or relationship is the highway towards enlightenment. So any kind of authentic love, including the love for your partner, including for the love between humans, is a form of grace because it helps us uproot our usual attachments and habits. You have to give up yourself if you really want to love someone else. So this requires selflessness and giving freely from yourself, of yourself. Also, Islam talks about the sexual union as a sacred act, as an experience, as it were, of fana. Fana, which we mentioned in the last lesson, fana, the experience of dissolution of the ego, a momentary freedom from the bonds of separation. So sexuality in the Sufi perspective is not something that you try to overcome. In fact, Islam does not know any celibacy. Sexuality, when sanctified, becomes an expression of that experience of fana. Now, what happens is that most people do not understand that their love is in fact a reflection of divine love. And this is the trap that Rumi often speaks about and often warns the human being about. He always reminds the human being that love can only be the love for God. For example, everything except love of the most beautiful is really agony. It's agony to move towards death. and not drink the water of life. Why move towards death? Because if we attach ourselves purely to the object of our love, we will eventually experience agony, because that object is meant to wither away, is meant to die eventually, as we are also meant to die. So if we attach ourselves to that transient form of love, we are going to suffer. But if we can understand that, in fact, these are just manifestations, temporary manifestations of divine love, then that is a different perspective. Ibn Arabi also beautifully twists the Shahada here a little bit, and he says, there is no lover and beloved but God. Or, none loves God but God. None loves God but God. And let me quote another passage from Rumi's Fihi ma Fihi, where he makes this point very clear. He says, all the hopes, desires, loves, and affections that people have for different things, fathers, mothers, friends, heavens, the earth, gardens, palaces, sciences, works, food, drink. The saint knows that these are desires for God, and all those things are veils. When men leave the world and they see the king without these veils, then they will know that all were veils and coverings, that the object of their desire was in reality that one thing. All their difficulties will be solved. All the questions and perplexities they had in their breasts will be answered. They will see all things face to face. Let's go to Afghanistan and listen to a folk song featuring Sufism's most famous love story.
شب آب گردون نالم میبره شب آب گردون نالم کرده ای خاری مغیلان بالشم کرده ای خاری مغیلان بالشم شب مجنون به خلوتگاهی راست گفت و ای پروردگاری بی نیاز نامم از باری چی مجنون کرده ای بار لیلا با دلم خونه کرده ای نامم از باری چی مجنون کرده ای بار لیلا با دلم خونه کرده ای نامم از باری چی مجنون کرده ای بار لیلا با دلم خونه
So this story is the story of Layla and Majnun, which is, if you want, the Islamic equivalent to Romeo and Juliet. And this story emerged in Arabia originally, but was then adopted by Persian poets, the most famous being Nizami. And the original story goes like this. There is a young Arab Bedouin called Qais, and Qais goes to this gathering of women and spots Layla. And the moment he sees Layla, he profoundly falls in love. So much so that he sacrifices his camel for the feast. Then a man called Manazil enters the gathering, and all the other women put their attention on Manazil. who is a very handsome man, except Layla, who also has her eyes on Qais and returns Qais's love for her. Qais, in his love, goes to Layla's father and asks for her hand. But of course, her father refuses, saying that Layla is already meant to be with someone else. In deep sorrow, Qais begins to lose his mind and reason, and he goes into the wilderness half naked to live with wild animals. Now, Majnun, that's how he's called now. Qais is now called Majnun. Majnun means crazed or mad. Lives in this state of madness in the desert. And his father, who's very worried about him, takes him out of the desert to Mecca on the pilgrimage with the hope that maybe he will be cured on the Hajj. But this experience of going to Mecca only intensifies his love for Layla. And in his moments of awareness and lucidity, Majnun begins to compose poems expressing his love for Layla. But he never sees her again and dies. So, this famous parable, which appears again and again in Sufi poetry, also in Rumi's Masnavi, is an image for the craze of divine love, for giving yourself up, for dying in the quest for the beloved. Now, let's look a little bit more at Rumi, how he expresses this divine love in his poetry. In order to understand Rumi's view of love, we need to look at his biography, first of all. I think many of you will have already heard maybe bits of pieces of Rumi's life story. I won't be able to tell you Rumi's whole biography here. That, I hope, will be part of a separate course in the future when we dive deeper into Rumi. But just to tell you that Rumi, in his youth, was trained as an Islamic scholar. So he studied in today's Syria, in Aleppo, and became an expert in Islamic law, in the Sharia, in Quranic exegesis, in the interpretation of hadith, and all those traditional outer Islamic sciences. And when he returns to Konya, where his father had migrated with the whole family, he becomes this very well-known and well-respected scholar with students and teaching in the madrasas. And suddenly, at some point, this very fateful encounter happens with a wandering dervish called Shams Tabrizi. And Shams Tabrizi is kind of the opposite of Rumi, because Rumi has a high reputation. Shams doesn't care at all about what people say about him. He is a free spirit. He wanders from one town to the next town, keeping a low profile. He doesn't want to be recognized. At the same time, he also is a deep lover of the Prophet Muhammad and a teacher of the Quran, in fact. So he's not only this wild vagabond that people have usually pictured him as, but he has a very different approach to Islam, to spirituality than Rumi. So when the two meet and Rumi falls in love with Shams, and they begin to spend a lot of time with each other, a deep transformation takes place in Rumi's life. So, what is this transformation about? There is an anecdote appearing in the hagiographies about Rumi, where Rumi is seated next to a pool of water, and Shams comes and asks Rumi, Rumi, what are you doing? And Rumi has a pile of books next to him and is studying the books. And Rumi retorts, oh, what do you know about this? Shams comes closer and he takes the books and he throws them into the pool. And Rumi, he's shocked, his precious books. And then Shams, with one motion of his hand, makes the book surface from the water again. And lo and behold, the books are dry, nothing has happened to them. And Rumi, looking in bewilderment at Shams, asks, what did you do? And Shams says, oh, what do you know about this? So this pretty tale tells us what Shams did. He asked Rumi to leave behind, to throw away all that he knows, to become empty for the wisdom that Shams wanted to impart to him. And here we need to see that the relationship between Shams and Rumi is one not only of teacher and student, but really one of deep spiritual friendship. So Shams found in Rumi someone who could receive his message, whereas Shams for Rumi was the missing piece in his spiritual path. Rumi was already a highly achieved spiritual person, but with Shams, that element of love, that element of letting go came into his life. Now, it is said that Shams and Rumi closed themselves into a room for weeks in a row, which of course was not very, which of course shocked the students of Rumi. Suddenly their teacher was no more. And nowadays, there is this very naive interpretation that, oh, the love between Rumi and Shams must have been an erotic kind of a love, maybe even a homosexual relationship, which is far from the truth. If we look at the sources, first of all, Rumi as someone being steeped in Islam and in a tradition where, homoerotic love was considered not what you would practice as a believing Muslim. At least that's the theory. I'm not talking about homophobia. I'm just talking really about a certain kind of a worldview. In fact, Shams also and Rumi also has parts where he criticizes the behavior of some masters who were engaging with boys, with young boys, in a kind of a homoerotic way. So Rumi is very critical of that practice, in fact. And then also we have the fact that Shams was much older than Rumi. He was in his 60s, whereas Rumi was a young man. And of course, we also see very clearly that when Rumi praises Shams and expresses his love for Shams in his poetry, he really means that love for the divine. So Shams becoming that metaphor for God, for the divine. It is only with our modern our modern projection that we can reach to this conclusion. But that, of course, would confine Rumi to a very narrow understanding of love. With Rumi, who then began to compose poetry, because at some point Shams disappeared out of his life. And this deep pain of separation that he experienced in the absence of his dearest friend, of his dearest master, that experience triggered or unleashed thousands of verses from within him, fueled by this separation. So separation here is actually not something bad. It is really that pain that creates the longing and then triggers this creative force. So in that state of separation and intoxication, Rumi starts to compose poetry. And in fact, with Rumi, a new form of spiritual personality emerges. That's what Kabir Helminski says, the Mevlevi master, Kabir Helminski, that from all the other spiritual characters that we have, like the Gnostics, the hermits, the meditators, the fakirs, the yogis, we can now say with Rumi, we have a new spiritual personality, and that is the personality of the lover. And that's what we see in Rumi's poetry. Let's go to a famous poem from the Divan-e-Shams, which is the collection of poetry in honor of Shams, that are full of love poems, And one of those poems is called Hilat Rahokun in Farsi. Put aside your clever schemes. O lover, be mindless, become mad. Dive into the heart of the flame. Become fearless, be like a moth. Turn away from the self and tear down the house. Then come and dwell in the house of love. Be a lover, live with the lovers. Now let's listen to this poem from the voice of the great Muhammad Reza Shajarian, the maestro of Persian classical music, who passed away last year.
حیلت رها کن عاشقا دیوانه شو دیوانه شو دیوانه شو دیوانه شو من در دل آتش درآ پروانه شو پروانه شو پروانه شو پروانه شو هم خویش را بیگانه کن هم خانه را ویرانه کن وانگه بیا با عاشقان هم خانه شو هم خانه شو هم خانه شو هم خانه شو
Shajarian, may he rest in peace. So, the power of love, as we said, is transformative. And it has an alchemical effect upon the soul. What does that mean? Using the metaphor of turning lead into gold. All that is base and cheap in us can be illuminated and become like gold through love. This alchemy, this transformation, happens in the heart being the center of the human microcosm. We already spoke about the heart in the last lesson as the seat of real knowledge. And it is also the place, the locus of that love, the place where the divine reality resides. As in the Hadith Qudsi, the heavens and the earth cannot contain me, but the heart of my faithful servant does contain me. And that's also why Sufis sometimes are called Ahl Dil, or the people of the heart, because they are the ones who have purified their hearts. For Sufis, love is like fire. So often in the poetry, you have fire as a metaphor, because with its heat, it burns away selfishness, greed, anger, ego, and leaves behind only God. And that's, of course, speaking of heat, can be quite a challenging process where you have to let go of many things. Rumi uses many metaphors to describe this alchemy. He says in one poem, love makes bitter sweet. Love turns copper into gold. Love makes dregs into wine. Love turns pain into healing. Love brings the dead to life. Love makes kings into slaves. But this love results from knowledge. When did a fool sit on this throne? How can faulty knowledge give birth to love? It gives birth to love, but love for inanimate things. When it sees the color of its desire in the things, it hears the call of the beloved in a whistle. Faulty knowledge does not know the difference. It thinks that lightning is the sun. So here again, Rumi clearly making that discernment between um, the love of things for the sake of those things, or the love of God, being aware of the love of God behind every other type of love. So it's important to love with knowledge. Knowledge and love go together, and loving has to be practiced, if it is to be spiritual love, with the right attitude. And pain is that longing, you remember from the story of the ney, the reed flute, that longing that makes us become thirsty and makes us actually generate that love from within ourselves. Be the captive of love in order that you may be truly free, says Jami, another famous Persian poet. Free from coldness and the worship of self. Thousands have passed who were wise and learned, but who were strangers to love. No name is left of them, nothing to proclaim their fame and dignity or to relate their history in the march of time. Although you may attempt to do 100 things in this world, only love will give you release from the bondage of yourself. I think the point became clear, and as they say in Turkish, aşıklar ölmez, the lovers never die. So love makes you, real love makes you eternal, makes you immortal. When love is manifested In the social realm, we call it justice. And you will remember from the life story of Prophet Muhammad that an important aspect of the Islamic message was social justice. The Quran says in the 16th surah, this is God's command, love and justice. So when we strive for justice and when we struggle for justice in society, nowadays, much needed, we actually bring love into the social realm. We bring love into existence. And that is also what Sheikh Kabir Helminski means when he says we have to practice love at will. So he argues that sometimes we have this image that, oh, my heart is closed, I cannot feel love. And love is something like really transcendent that I somehow have to feel spontaneously, and it has to come to me. No, he says, actually, love is something that can be practiced at will through generosity, through kindness, through justice, through this very moment-to-moment practice in daily life with the people around us, with the situations that are given to us in this very moment right now. And this is also what we call ihsan, beauty of action, bringing love into daily life, into reality. Another quote that is attributed to Rumi is this one: in generosity and helping others, be like a river. In compassion and grace, be like the sun. In concealing others' faults, be like the night. In anger and in fury, be as if you have died. In modesty and humility, be like the earth. In tolerance, be like the sea. Appear as you are, or be as you appear. Let's finish with a poem from the Masnavi. دین من از عشق زنده بودن است. زندگی زین جان و سر ننگ من است. تیغ هست از جان عاشق گرد روب. زانکه سیف افتاد محال الذنوب. چون غبار تن بشد ماهم بتفت. ماه جان من هوای صاف یافت. عمرها بر طبل عشقت ای صنم. ای فی متی حیاتی میزنم. My religion is to live through love. A life created from my own small mind and self would be a disgrace. The blade of love cuts away what covers the lover's soul. Love's sword severs sins. When the bodily grime is gone, a shining moon appears. Spirit's moon in a wide open sky. I have beaten this drum of love for so long for you whom I adore, singing, my life depends upon my dying.